Greetings everyone, my name is MarioDell'olio and I'm going to be doing a reading from my memoir, Coming About, Life in the Balance. It's a story about my husband and I who lived in San Francisco and decided to chuck it all and buy a boat and sail off to the Caribbean, to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. The sailing adventure didn't go as planned, and that's where the story comes from. So I'm going to read a chapter from near the end of the book. I finally cut through the line, and we swiftly drifted away. Jim engaged the outboard motor and headed parallel to the shoreline in search of a harbor. It felt as if we were finally free as we looked back at Sonia. She had almost killed us for the second time. It seemed as if the boat was cursed. I know that sounds superstitious or just plain crazy, but there was a dark energy surrounding everything that had to do with her. Jean-Pierre felt it as well. He called her the devil boat. So I was glad to get away from her and leave all that pain behind us. I just wanted to get back to dry land and go home. Our relief at being free from the evil aura of Sonia didn't last for long. The reality of our situation was beginning to hit us. Dinghies were not meant to be in high seas because they can easily flip over. Jim sat with his hand on the motor, keeping watch on what was in front of us. I faced him from the bow of the dinghy and watched what was coming from behind. The waves poured into the boat, but I was ready with a bucket to bail the water. At times, it seemed like a never-ending battle, but it kept me busy. I didn't have time to worry about our safety. We had to do whatever was needed to get to shore. We were both very alert, and we seemed to be dodging the huge breaks in the waves pretty well. Where are we heading, Jim? I really don't know. I figure if we head down the coast, there will be a port somewhere. Who knew that we'd need the GPS more than Jean-Pierre? I grumbled. At least we had a real powerboat with huge engines. I'm sure he's working on getting someone to save us. Well, I hope they get here soon. I knew that we couldn't go straight to shore because of the Devil's Backbone, the huge coral reef that stretched for miles along the coastline. After a bit of motoring, Jim noticed a microwave tower in the far distance. We hoped that there would be a harbor or an inlet there. With a definite destination in view, we aimed for it. We were silent as we motored along the coastline. We were both scared and wondered what would happen next. However, there was no room for addressing our fears. We had to forge ahead. I'm not sure how long we were motoring, but it seemed like hours. The swells created 20-foot walls rising all around us. We could see land so clearly when we were at the crest of a wave. But in the valley between them, it was ominous. Walls of gray-blue ocean seemed to push inwards towards us. I was claustrophobic being surrounded by the sea, hoping that none of the waves would break and come tumbling down on us. We forged on as the sun got lower in the sky. When we reached the microwave tower, we realized that it was further inland than it had appeared. We were both deflated. There was no port in sight. And Jim looked at me and said, "Okay, so there's no harbor here. But this part of the island is populated. There are lots of houses right along the shoreline." "What are you suggesting, Jim? That we should head to shore right here?" I don't know. I don't know how much fuel we have left, and I don't want to be stranded out here without power. I nodded. It looks like we're losing daylight too. Do you recall from the maps if we're even close to a harbor? No, I don't. It may literally be a shot in the dark. What do you think we should do, Mario? Well, at least there are houses here. Most of this island is uninhabited, right? If we wait too long, we might be stranded with no fuel and no one to help us. Where the hell is that Coast Guard? It's been hours since we sent the SOS signal off. I don't know, but you're right. Maybe we should try to cross the reef here. At least someone might see us and send for help, Jim responded. Do you think we can survive crossing the Devil's Backbone, Jim? We have to, Mario. We will. I know we will, he said with determination. We looked out at the reef that stretched for miles in either direction. The waves were crashing down upon it with force. But beyond the area of turbulence, we saw calmer waters that were just inside the reef. There were beautiful white sand beaches with homes looking out over the ocean. We knew what we had to do, so we silently shifted course, keeping our eyes fixed on the gathering surge around us. We dodged numerous waves as we headed towards the shore. But the reef was still ahead. The color of the water changed from deep blue to crystal clear aquamarine. We were heading into shallower waters. It was almost as if we were tiptoeing over the angry waves, hoping not to be noticed. As we got closer to the Devil's Backbone, the churning waters became more and more violent. Waves were crashing onto each other with greater force. It looked like we were in whitewater rafting route as we were tossed and pushed and pulled in different directions. The sound was thundering all around us, and we had to shout to be heard. We had made it to the Devil's Backbone, and now it was time to cross over. We braced ourselves for the trial that lay ahead. Jim tried to time our crossing with the break of the waves. He studied them like a surfer waiting for the perfect swell at just the right moment. With little warning, he made his move. He came at it from an angle and tried to ride the top of a huge break in the wave. It was coming at us from behind. He tried to rev the motor to get some speed, but it wasn't powerful enough. As we crested the wave, we felt it begin to buckle beneath us. The dinghy was tossed about like a leaf in the wind, and there was nothing to keep us steady. Water was coming at us from every direction, but we were still afloat. We thought we might just make it when another surge hit us from the side and crashed directly into us. We were flipped over and pounded under the surf. Everything in the dinghy went flying through the air and into the sea, including us. It all happened in the blink of an eye. The rush of the breaking water pushed at me from multiple directions. I was completely disoriented. I opened my eyes, and all I could see was white water swirling around me. It was coming in at me from all directions. My heart was beating rapidly. I couldn't breathe. I desperately tried to get back to the surface for air, but I couldn't tell which way was up. I could no longer see the dinghy. I thrashed about and paddled as hard as I could, trying to figure out which direction would lead me to the surface. Then I noticed the direction the bubbles were moving in, and I followed them. I used my upper body to propel my way up, only to find myself under the capsized dinghy. The surf was still churning, and there was no air underneath the dinghy. I dove down, but couldn't get much distance. It felt like something was holding me back. I worked my way back up to the surface once again and came up under the dinghy. I was running out of oxygen. and I needed to get my head above the water immediately. I dove down a final time, tried to go deeper so as to clear the boat. This time I emerged with my head bouncing on the rubber pontoon, still under the water. The surface was either to my left or to my right. I had a 50-50 chance of getting it right. I took a chance and made a decision. Thankfully, I came up right beside the outboard motor. Gasping for air, I heard Jim frantically yelling my name. He'd begun to panic when he didn't see me. He dove below but saw nothing but white water. It was so turbulent that he had trouble staying afloat without hanging on to the dinghy. After several failed attempts, he just held on and shouted for me. When he finally saw me, he cried out with relief. "Oh my God, Mario, I thought you were gone. Are you all right? Just hang on." When I could finally speak, I responded, "Yeah, I'm just trying to catch my breath." "Mario, get on the wave side of the dinghy so we can be pushed toward the shore." But I began to wiggle around in a frenzy. Something was wrong. "Jim, I can't move my legs. I don't know what's happening." "Do you have any pain? Can you feel them?" No pain. I can move my feet, but it feels like something is strangling me." As I thrashed about, I realized the ropes and gas line were tangled around my legs and my waist. I couldn't break free. When we capsized, the lines got caught up in the propeller and wrapped around my legs, pulled tight. I was trapped. That's why I had so much trouble getting up to the surface when we were thrown overboard. In addition to being tethered to the dinghy and the motor, I could only use my arms to swim. With the raging waters pushing at me in all directions, it was a losing battle. I gasped for air as the swells continued to break over my face. I was having trouble catching my breath through each hit from the crashing waves. Thankfully, with Jim's help, I was finally able to break free of the lines. Both Jim and I were in shock. The reality of what we had just survived began to sink in. We had been pounded into the reef under the tumultuous waters. Our bodies were slammed against the rocks and the dead coral like rag dolls. Had it not been for our foul weather gear, we would have suffered serious lacerations. There was only a moment to absorb the fact that we had survived with minor injuries. But it wasn't over yet. The shoreline was still several miles away. We managed to hang on to the dinghy and began to calm down. We knew that we had to think rationally in order to survive. There were roughly 2 miles to go before we reached the shore. We hoped that the waves would eventually push us into land. And we looked at each other, and Jim asked, "Are you doing okay, Mario?" Yeah, I'm fine. Finally caught my breath, and I don't hurt too much. How are you doing?" "Good. A little shell-shocked, but good. Let's just get to those houses on the shore." "Okay, let's keep kicking." Firm in our resolve, we began to kick our legs and push the dinghy towards the shore. We were still in the midst of a coral reef and were surrounded by white water. A few minutes later, we saw some of the white garbage bags that I had filled floating to the surface. "There's all our stuff," I thought. And without thinking, I let go of the dinghy and swam to grab the closest bag. Our identification and all our important documents were in one of them. I needed to retrieve them. I grabbed the bag no more than 15 feet from the boat and felt a momentary lapse and a sense of accomplishment. But once I had it in hand, I thought, "Are you crazy, Mario? You could have been caught in the reef and not been able to get back to the boat." I felt my heart racing as I tried to swim back to the dinghy. The waves continued to crash upon me, and I realized how reckless I was being. I was already fatigued from the past 24 hours of seasickness and dehydration. I had used a significant amount of my remaining strength, struggling to get to the surface after we had capsized. It was obvious that my determination overcame my ability to reason. I was fighting the stormy waters to get back. In our preparations to abandon Sonio, neither of us had put on life jackets. I'm not a particularly pious person, but I recall looking up to the sky and crying out in anger, "What the hell have you done to us?" Of course, that resulted in a mouthful of salt water from a wave that crashed onto my face. "Thanks," I replied. When I finally reached the dinghy, I was angry with myself. I vowed not to take further risks. Then, Jim spotted another one of the bags. I knew that it contained my coveted Nikon camera. It was my baby, and I had already lost one on our voyage the previous November. It was his turn to be reckless, so he let go of the boat and swam to retrieve it. He got it in no time and started heading back to me. But the waves fought him as well. I could see him struggling, and at one point, I feared that he would not be able to get back. He was kicking and paddling forward, but the currents were pushing him to the side. When he finally got back to the dinghy, we both exhaled in relief. What the hell were we thinking? Hadn't we taken enough risks with our lives? What is so important that we had to put our lives in harm's way once again? Everything else is replaceable. Our lives are not. So, there it is. I must confess that my heart gets a little bit rapid in its beating when I read that section, because all the memories come right back to me. So anyway, there's a chapter from Coming About, Life in the Balance. Now, I hope this bedtime story puts you right to sleep and that you have sweet dreams of sailing. Cheers.